Hey everybody, I hope your semester is going well. I've got a couple announcements for you and then a quick devotional as you get going with your day and as we enter into the month of February. When this semester started, we were under the impression from the university that we may not be able to hold services on campus until maybe February the 17th, I think it was, because the 18th is a Friday and the 19th is a Saturday. And so it was a good surprise when we found out that they actually backed that up a little bit. We're going to be able to have our meetings starting next Thursday. I believe it's February the 3rd. And we're going to have our meetings every Thursday starting in February. But here's the kicker. I went to go reserve our room and it had been reserved by somebody else in Baracha 221. Now, out of all the years that I've been here, I've never run into this issue. So I contacted the other group. I asked them if they could bend, move, change, do anything. They dug in their heels. They're not going anywhere. So now we are out of a meeting room. It looks like we are going to get permission to hold our meetings this semester in the multi-purpose room of Spring Hall. So it's right at the end of the hall in Spring, at the very end, close to the street. But you can be able to get in there and then just walk down the hall, and we'll be able to set up things and just make it work, because that's how the last 2 years have felt. Constantly pivoting to the next thing. Are we going to be in person? Are we going to be virtual? What do the classes look like? What does the spring break look like? What does the summer? I mean, just everything seems to be constantly in flux. As of now, it looks like we are still on, however, for our fall retreat, which is February 18th and 19th, the 24-hour retreat. I'm going to update the website today, which means by the time you watch this video, it should be ready to go. You can go to stlouisxa.com and register for that retreat. I encourage you, if you're even on the fence, to just register so that we have an idea of what kind of head count we could potentially have for this retreat. If you want to pay early, you can do that. But right now, it looks like we're not going to have any problem with that retreat. But of course, things in this world that we're living in on this campus that we're on seem to be changing almost by the week, which is what I want to talk to you about. I have been studying or thinking about Acts chapter 15 and 16 for a while. And Acts chapter 15 is the story of the Gentile church through Peter and Paul and their witness of the Spirit coming upon these Gentile believers in the same way that it's fallen upon them as Jewish believers. You have the Gentile church not really at odds, but trying to figure out how they integrate with the Jewish church. The Jewish church still kind of figuring out all the things that changed in Jesus' arrival, how he fulfilled the Old Testament. What does that mean for them? How do they move forward? They're trying to weigh out what stays and what goes in this new covenant that's been established by Jesus. And so in their minds, some of their minds, they felt that in order for a Gentile, an outsider, to become an insider, they had to go through the same hoops that someone would have to go through in the Old Covenant. In other words, they had to be circumcised, they had to go through the rituals and all the programs necessary in order to be a full convert. Well, then all of a sudden, Paul and Barnabas go on this missionary adventure and they find all these churches springing up, not because people are getting circumcised or obeying the Old Testament law, but because of faith, that there is this faith that comes in Jesus, and then Jesus pours out the Spirit upon them, and they are experiencing the life of Jesus in the same way that the Jewish church is, primarily the one in Jerusalem. So we have this issue. Do Gentiles completely throw away everything that has come before them in terms of the Jewish heritage that they're now receiving? And do Jewish believers make the Gentile believers have to bend to their practices and their traditions? And so Barnabas and Paul go down to Jerusalem and they set this issue before the church, the mother church, the church that has some of the remaining apostles in it. And they say, what are we going to do? And in a short order, and instead of going into all the details, basically what they say is, listen, we shouldn't make it difficult for anyone to come into the family of God. So we're not going to lay any Old Testament laws upon them, because as Jewish people, we couldn't even keep all of them. So why would we make them do that? But they did set up a basic standard of holiness. In other words, they said, however, There are certain things that you should abstain from that raises your relationship with God. In other words, everything in the past, all the traditions and the laws and everything of the old covenant, they're not meaningless. They have power and they have purpose. And so we should adhere to those while also recognizing that those are not the foundation upon which you came to faith and received the Holy Spirit. And they said, so in essence, what we're asking you to do is to abstain from idolatry, of drinking blood, strangling animals in sacrifice. And I know it sounds odd to us, but in a pagan culture, that was a normal custom of how you appease the gods. And so they're saying all these pagan practices that you used to have, they need to go. And on top of all that, a lot of times, sexual immorality, orgies, and the like were oftentimes tied to the temples in which they would go and practice these forms of idolatry. And so they said, we ask you to abstain from all sexual immorality, both in a temple cult, but then also in everyday life. They said, if you do these things, it'll go well for you. It's a simple letter, but in order for you to verify a letter in the ancient world, in other words, in order to make sure that it was authentic, you would send missionaries, you would send people to verify that this was a letter from this particular group. And so two men follow Barnabas and Paul back to Antioch, back to the Gentile church hub, if you will, with this letter. And these two men, one of them is named Judas, and the other's named Silas. And they come and they present this letter, they answer any questions, they divulge all the information that they know, and that's the end that we hear of that story, until the very next chapter. When all of a sudden, after some time, it says that Barnabas and Paul say, you know what we should do? We should take this letter and we should go encourage and check up on all those churches that God planted during our first trip throughout all of Asia Minor, which is modern day Syria and Turkey. And so Barnabas and Paul have this agreement. They decide that Barnabas is going to take Mark and go to Cyprus, which is where his hometown is, and that Paul is going to take Silas, the one who brought up the letter from Jerusalem, and they're going to go visit all these churches. However, a fascinating thing happens along the way, and I want to read for you, real briefly, their experience, and then ask you a question that I think is really important for you to hear during this time that we're currently living in. So here's what Acts 16, verses 6 through 10 read. And it says, and when they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And when they had gone up to Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas, and in a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing and urging him and saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Now, here's what's fascinating about that message, about that instance. Paul and Silas were going to previously established churches to check in on them and to give them a message, and Jesus keeps shutting doors. Shutting doors, shutting doors. Don't go there, don't go there, don't go there, until literally they get to the end of the road. Troas is literally the last stop before you get to the Aegean Sea. There's nowhere else to go. They find themselves all the way to the edge of what they currently knew at that time. And all of a sudden, Paul has a vision of someone from the other side of the Aegean Sea, a Macedonian, who says, come and help us. Come over here. And it is a surefire call to God, from God to Paul and to Silas, that they are going to not revisit former churches. They're going to break ground and start new congregations through the help of the Holy Spirit in the Greek world. This was huge. It changed everything. You and I are feeling the effects of that particular moment. And in the midst of all of that, I'm asking myself one question. What was Silas thinking? Like, here's this guy from Jerusalem. He's just there to verify the letter, but he also loves the mission of God. But now he finds himself in Asia Minor traveling with Paul, thinking that he's going to continue to answer the questions that these Gentile churches have, to continue encouraging them, to continue to give them and read them this letter that has been sent from Jerusalem. And all of a sudden he finds himself on the edge of the known world for him, and all of a sudden crossing a sea, heading into the city of Philippi and starting a brand new movement in a brand new place. What was Silas thinking? Obviously, he's thinking, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't see this coming. This was not in my perspective. And yet, here was God challenging him and moving him into new things. Here's how I feel like it applies. Over the last 2 years, our lives have had to pivot and pivot and pivot and change, and this and that, mandate, no mandate, vaccines, in classes, out of classes, virtual, non-virtual. I mean, everything seems in constant flux, and it's changed our lives. It's changed the way that we relate to each other during this time. It's changed the sense of community and what we do with our time, how we spend our time, and whether or not we are really, number one, living a life of holiness. Number two, caring about the ways and the path of God. But here's the third one, and I want you to think hard about this one. When we know that doors are closed, when we see that things have changed, when we see that life is not going to be the same, or that God in His providence has led us down the road to where we stand at our Troas in our life, the end of the road, thinking to ourselves, where do we go from here? God answers the call and leads us into new opportunities. The question I have for you is whether or not you are listening to Jesus, because He might just have new ideas of what it looks like to serve Him and know Him and to minister during these times. Whenever we get into these moments like we've experienced with COVID, and everything within you just wants to shut down, to make life as simple as possible, I want to challenge you that maybe what God is doing in your life is He's saying, things are changing. Are you going to change with me? Are you going to look for the new people in your life or the new ways of interacting with people? Are you going to look for the new opportunities all around you to minister, to help, to serve, to grow, to expand your influence into new areas of life? So I want you to think about that. Just because certain things are shutting down, certain doors are shutting down, doesn't mean that new opportunities aren't presenting themselves. The question is whether you are listening or in tune with the Holy Spirit as to what those particular things are. Pray about it, think about it, talk with your friends about it, allow it to be a new opportunity for you to see God do new things in your life and ultimately through your life. So if you need anything, as always, get in touch. I'd be more than happy to help you in these upcoming days and weeks, and I'm praying for you. All right, God bless.